Welcome to Revenge with Arya. My name is Maya Reeves, and I am 31 years old. I want to tell you about the night my family sat across from me at our dining room table, the one I had paid for, in the house I had kept afloat for 6 years, and handed me a piece of paper with 3 numbers on it. 60%, 20%, and 0, which was what they believed I deserved to keep. I had just accepted a senior principal role at a software company in Austin. Total compensation, including base, bonus, and equity vest, came to $540,000 a year. I had spent a decade earning that number. Night classes while working full-time. Certifications I paid for myself. Relocations I funded out of my own savings while sending money home every single month without being asked, because that was what I did. That was what I had always done, for as long as I could remember. My father lost his manufacturing business when I was 19. Not to bad luck, not to the economy, though he told that version of the story beautifully at every family gathering. He lost it to bad decisions, to a credit line he extended recklessly, to a lifestyle that outpaced his revenue by a margin so wide that by the time I graduated college, the house had a second mortgage and my mother had not worked in 11 years. My older brother, 35 years old, had been launching his own venture for the better part of a decade, a description that in practice meant he worked occasionally, complained constantly, and treated my parents' home like a hotel he had somehow earned the right to occupy indefinitely. I never minded helping. That is the part I need you to understand. I loved my family. I wired money for the mortgage the month after I started my first real job, because the alternative was watching my parents lose their home. I added my father to my car insurance when his lapsed. I paid my mother's dental bills, my brother's car note twice, my sister-in-law's credit card when she called crying about the balance. I did all of it without keeping a ledger, without demanding gratitude, without even telling anyone outside the family because I thought that was what you did when you had more than the people you loved. The mistake I made was trusting my brother with my new offer letter. He had asked to see it. Proud of me, he said. Just curious what a tech salary looked like these days. I was still riding the high of the offer. I showed him. He photographed it. I did not know that until 3 days later when my mother called me into the dining room with the formality of a summons and slid that piece of paper across the table like a contract that had already been decided. 60% to the household. 20% to my brother's new venture, which apparently needed a capital injection to finally get off the ground. The remaining 20 was mine to live on, though my mother noted, generously, that since I was technically still on their family phone plan, I was already getting something back. My father sat at the head of the table and said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at me and said the words I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You didn't get there alone. This family's sacrificed for you. Now, it's time you understood what that means. I looked at my mother. She smoothed the edge of the paper with her thumb, like she was ironing out a wrinkle in fabric, and said, "We're not asking, Maya. We're telling you how this is going to work. You're part of this family, or you're not." Something happened in my chest. Not anger, not yet. It was quieter than anger. It was the sound of a door closing that I had been holding open my entire adult life. I looked at the paper one more time. Then I looked at both of them and smiled, just slightly, and said, "Let me think about it." I thought about it for exactly 48 hours. Then I called my bank, removed my parents from the joint account I had foolishly kept open for family emergencies, which had in practice become a secondary income stream they accessed with the casualness of a grocery run. I called the mortgage servicer and informed them that the recurring payment set up under my name would not be renewing. I called the car insurance company and removed my father. I canceled the credit card my mother had been an authorized user on for 4 years. I opened a new account at a different bank entirely, had my direct deposit rerouted, and by the following Monday, the financial architecture I had quietly built beneath my family's feet simply ceased to exist. Then I signed the lease on a furnished apartment across town, packed a single carload of my personal belongings from the room I still technically kept at their house, and left. I did not tell them I was leaving. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I love you, but my answer is no." The first call came that Wednesday. My mother's voice was not panicked yet, just sharp, a controlled version of the tone she used when something had gone wrong and she needed it fixed before anyone else noticed. The mortgage payment didn't go through. There must be an error with your bank. You need to call them today. I was eating lunch on the small balcony of my new apartment, watching traffic move below me in the afternoon heat. I let it go to voicemail. By Friday, my father had called 11 times. I know the number because I counted. Not because I was keeping score, but because I needed to understand the shape of what I was dealing with. The voicemails ranged from imperious to confused to, by the final one, something that sounded almost like fear, though he wrapped it in enough anger that you could miss it if you weren't listening carefully. You are embarrassing this family. You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities? Call me back right now. My brother's texts were different. They came in clusters at odd hours, swinging between manipulation and accusation the way only someone who has practiced both for years can manage. First, it was "Mom is really upset." Then it was, "This is so selfish. I can't believe you." Then late one night, simply, "You know Dad's blood pressure has been bad. If something happens to him, that's on you." I read that one twice. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and slept better than I had in years. What I had not anticipated, or perhaps I had and had chosen not to dwell on, was how quickly the infrastructure of their life would begin to show its rot once I stopped maintaining it. It did not happen overnight. It took about 3 weeks before the calls started coming from other directions. The homeowners association asking about outstanding dues. The country club where my parents had maintained a membership for 15 years, which I had been subsidizing for the last 4 of those years without quite admitting to myself what I was doing. A collections notice for my brother's business, which had apparently accumulated vendor debts that he had been promising to clear any day now for months. My mother tried a different approach around week 2. Her voice on that voicemail was soft, practiced, the version of her that came out at church and at neighborhood parties. The one that made people say she was such a warm woman. "Sweetheart, I know things have been tense. I want you to know that your father and I are so proud of everything you've accomplished. We may have communicated our concerns in a way that felt harsh, and I'm sorry if that hurt you. We just love you so much, and we want to make sure this family stays together. Can we just talk?" I played it twice, not because I was wavering, but because I wanted to hear clearly what it was. It was not an apology. An apology would have said the demand was wrong. This said the delivery may have been imperfect. There is a difference, and I had spent 31 years learning to tell those two things apart. I did not call back. What happened next came from a direction none of us expected, though in retrospect it was always going to happen. My brother had been telling people, for years, a very specific version of our family's story. The version where my father was a visionary entrepreneur temporarily between ventures. The version where my mother was a devoted homemaker who had raised exceptional children. The version where my brother himself was on the verge of a breakthrough that would make everything make sense. None of these stories included me by name in any financial capacity. I was simply the daughter who worked in tech. Isn't that nice for her? But I had been paying for the backdrop of those stories, the house, the club, the dinners, the donations made in my parents' name to causes they were photographed supporting. When the donations stopped, people noticed. The Austin Children's Literacy Gala was the event my family had attended for 6 consecutive years, always listed as benefactors in the program, always seated at a premium table, always present when the photographer came around. My mother chaired the silent auction subcommittee in years 4 and 5. My father made a speech at year 3 about the importance of giving back to the community that had supported his own success. I had paid for every table, every bid, every donation. None of that appeared anywhere in the program. I found out they still attended that year. I was not there. I did not need to be. My college roommate, who served on the gala board, texted me a photo the following morning with a message. "Is everything okay with your family?" Kind of an awkward moment last night. In the photo, taken from across the room by someone with a steady hand and a good eye, my father stood at the bid table with his arm half raised. The posture of a man who has done this enough times that it had become reflex. Beside him, a gala coordinator leaned in close, her expression professional and uncomfortable at once, speaking quietly. My father lowered his arm. My mother's smile went rigid in a way that only people who knew her well would recognize. My brother, standing just behind them, looked at his phone. The table they had been seated at was in the second tier. not where they had sat before. By the following week, the story was circulating in the specific, murmured way that stories circulate in communities built on the performance of prosperity. Have you heard about the Rivezes? Something about finances. I heard their daughter cut them off. Didn't they used to cover the literacy fund table every year? I always wondered where that money actually came from. My mother called me 4 times the day after the gala. My brother texted, "Happy now?" My father left a single voicemail that I still have not deleted, not out of sentiment, but because I want to remember what it sounded like when a man who had told me for years that I owed him everything called to tell me I had humiliated the family. He did not ask how I was. He did not say anything about the paper they had slid across the table. He said I had made them look like fools, that I was vindictive and cruel, and that he had raised me better than this. I sat with that for a long time. Then I thought about the night they handed me that piece of paper, and I understood that he genuinely believed both things simultaneously. That I owed them everything, and that he had given me everything. The math of that had never been required to add up because I had never made it add up. I had simply paid whatever the balance demanded and called it love. The knock on my apartment door came on a Thursday night, late enough to feel deliberate. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother and my brother standing in the hallway, my brother with his hands in his pockets, my mother with her coat buttoned even though it was not cold. She looked smaller than I remembered, though I knew logically that nothing had changed about her physical dimensions. What had changed was that I was no longer arranging the world around her convenience. I opened the door. My mother's eyes filled immediately, which I had expected. She was a person who used her emotions the way some people use tools, not dishonestly exactly, but strategically, drawing on them when the situation required a particular effect. "Maya," she said, and my name in her mouth sounded like a plea and an accusation layered together. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot just disappear. We are your family." My brother stepped forward. "We need to talk about the mortgage. There's a notice. We have until the end of the month to make up the payments or the servicer is going to start the process. Do you understand what that means?" I understood perfectly. I had been the one managing that mortgage for 4 years. I knew the servicer's name, the loan number, and the exact language of the default notice better than either of them did. "I'm not going to cover it," I said. My mother's expression shifted, the softness giving way to something firmer. "You don't get to make that choice. That house is your home too." "I haven't lived there in 6 weeks," I said. "And I signed the lease on this apartment the same week you handed me that piece of paper." My brother's jaw tightened. "That was a conversation. You're acting like we issued some kind of ultimatum." I looked at him for a long moment. "You photographed my offer letter without asking me. You brought it to a family meeting I wasn't invited to. You drafted a document telling me what percentage of my salary you were entitled to. What word would you use for that?" Neither of them answered. "I'm not angry at you," I said. And I meant it, which surprised me when I heard myself say it. "I'm not doing this because I want to hurt you. I'm doing this because I should have done it a long time ago and I didn't, and that is on me as much as anyone." I looked at my mother. "I love you, but I am not your financial plan. I never should have been, and I cannot keep being that." My mother started to cry, genuine this time. Or at least genuinely mixed with the performed version, which is the most complicated kind to witness. My brother said something about how I had clearly been influenced by people who didn't understand what family meant. I did not debate him on that. There was nothing left to debate. I said goodnight and closed the door. The silence after the lock clicked was so complete it felt physical. I stood in my hallway for a moment, listening to it, and then I walked to the kitchen and made tea and sat by the window and thought about nothing in particular for a long time. What followed over the next several weeks was not something I orchestrated. I want to be clear about that because the version of this story that is most satisfying, the version where the wronged party engineers a precise and elegant downfall, is not what actually happened. What actually happened was that my family had built their entire visible life on a foundation I had been quietly pouring for years, and when I stopped pouring, the foundation showed itself for what it was. My father's country club membership lapsed. The fees had been going to a card I closed. He tried to renew directly and discovered his own credit score had deteriorated to a degree that required a cosigner. He asked my brother. My brother's credit was worse. They let the membership go, which would not have been a story at all except that my father had been telling people at that club about his forthcoming business relaunch for 2 years, and now he was simply gone, absent without the transition of a public success or even a graceful exit. My brother's venture, which had never been more than a business plan and a logo he'd had designed on a freelance site, lost its investor, which turned out to have been me, indirectly, through the money I had put into the household that freed up whatever my parents would otherwise have allocated to keeping him afloat. Without that buffer, the reality of his situation became visible. He and his wife moved out of the apartment they'd been in and into my parents' house, which created its own tensions I heard about secondhand through my cousin, who texted me occasionally with updates I had not asked for but did not discourage. My father found part-time consulting work. My mother returned to the workforce for the first time in over a decade, which I heard was difficult and humbling and ultimately better for her than anyone expected. My brother applied for jobs and was rejected and applied again, which is simply what that process looks like for most people, but which felt, I was told, like a profound indignity to someone who had spent years treating effort as optional. I did not reach out. I did not check in. I transferred the funds I had previously sent home into an investment account with my name on it and nothing else. I did go back once, not to the house, but to a diner about 20 minutes from where my parents now rented, after my father wrote me a letter. I don't know how he found my new address, though I have a guess involving my cousin and a moment of well-meaning indiscretion. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, the penmanship unsteady in a way I had never seen from him before. He told me he understood now that they had asked too much. He told me my mother missed me. He told me that he was working again, that it was not what he had imagined for himself at his age, but that it was honest, and that honesty was something he thought he had misplaced for a while. He asked if I would meet them. I went because of that word. Honest. It was the first time in my memory he had used it to describe himself in a way that pointed inward rather than outward. We sat in a booth with vinyl seats and a table that wobbled slightly on one uneven leg. My father looked older. My mother held her coffee with both hands like she needed the warmth. My brother was not there, which I noted and did not comment on. My father said he was sorry. Not in the language of a man looking for a counteroffer, not with conditions attached, but with the flatness of someone who had run out of ways to dress it up and was simply left with the plain version. "We were wrong," he said. "We treated you like a resource, and I think we did that for so long that we stopped seeing it. I'm sorry, Maya." My mother cried quietly into a paper napkin. I did not cry. I felt something, a tightening across my chest that I think was grief, or maybe the release of it, the long, slow exhale of a breath I had been holding for the better part of a decade. "I'm not coming back," I said. Not cruelly, just clearly. I don't mean forever. I don't know what forever looks like. But I'm not going back to how things were. I'm not going to be the person who holds everything together while pretending not to notice what it's costing me. My father nodded. Once. The nod of a man who had expected that answer and had decided to accept it. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I would have helped you forever, not because I owed you, but because I loved you and I had the means. But the second you turned it into a demand, you broke something. You can't unbreak it by being sorry. You can only build something different." My mother asked, very quietly, if there was a chance of something different. I thought about it honestly, sitting there with the smell of burnt coffee in the air and a table that rocked every time someone leaned on it. I thought about the letter my father had written. I thought about the word honest. I thought about the fact that my mother had gone back to work and had not called to tell me about it, had not leveraged it as an argument for my sympathy, had simply done it because it needed doing. "Maybe," I said. But slowly, and on completely different terms. I left before they finished their coffee. I paid for mine at the counter and walked out into the afternoon sun and sat in my car for a few minutes before I drove away. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to feel where I was before I moved again. The apartment I live in now has a small balcony that faces east. In the morning the light comes in low and warm, and I drink my coffee there before the day gets loud. My work is hard, and I am good at it, and on the days when it feels enormous, I remind myself that every difficult thing I navigated to get here, I navigated without anyone carrying any part of it for me. There is a loneliness in that, sometimes. Late at night. I won't pretend there isn't. But there's also this. I am 31 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, every dollar I earn belongs entirely to the life I am choosing to build. Not to an obligation I inherited. Not to a story someone else was telling about themselves using my money as the backdrop. Mine, completely. In a way that is so uncomplicated it still catches me off guard sometimes. I think about what my father said at that table the night this all began. That I didn't get there alone. He was right, actually, though not in the way he meant it. I got there by learning to carry more than my share, by learning to ask nothing in return, by learning to make myself indispensable to people who had confused indispensable with expendable. Those lessons cost me years I will not get back. But they also made me someone who knows exactly how much she's worth, not because a number on an offer letter told her so, but because she once gave everything she had to people who called it insufficient and walked away standing. They demanded 60% of my world. What I gave them was something they will spend the rest of their lives trying to understand. The version of me that is finally free.